Hello, everyone. So this will be a brief lecture just to introduce the concept that we're going to be focusing on this week. The reason why I want to do this is because I'd like to spend a majority of our time doing what we did last week, which was putting this to use, putting this to practice. And so as you're doing the reading and then supplementing it with this lecture, hopefully not supplementing, but actually coupling it with this lecture, hopefully you get a better, at least conceptual understanding of the concept that we're focusing on this week. And then when we get to class, we can start figuring out how to learn how to apply this and enact this in our practice. So let's connect some dots before we jump into this week so that we start to understand the importance of why we need this concept. So number one, we started the semester off with culturally responsive teaching. Anytime we go to teach, it's so important that we know our students. Now, could we easily go in and open a textbook and teach a lesson? Sure. Could we pick a standard, write an objective, and then come up with an engaging lesson in that way? Sure, absolutely. Is it going to meet our students' needs? Maybe. You might have an opportunity, or you might face the challenge or barrier of not meeting all your students' needs because you haven't got to know them. You don't know their strengths, you don't know their needs, you don't know their backgrounds, you don't know their prior experiences, their interest, any of those things, which might heighten the experience for them and show that we are being more responsive to who they are and who their culture, or what culture they bring to the classroom. And that way, then we have a better chance of being able to connect what we're teaching with them or to them. So that's really foundational. And we're going to continue to talk about this throughout the semester is how do we get to know students? Are we getting to know students? What are the barriers that we face in getting to know students? So then from there, once we have at least somewhat of a foundation of saying, okay, I'm now getting to know my students, I have some data. Now we start to think about the planning process and how we can incorporate instruction that would meet those, data points or those needs and assets that we've been learning about. So the last couple of weeks, we've been focusing on a couple different approaches, both teacher-centered and student-centered. Teacher-centered being the teacher is doing a lot more of the kind of direct instruction. So we have like presentation model, a direct instruction model, a concept-based teaching model, where the teacher becomes really the guide, the center stage. And that approach is needed in order to really help students learn these concepts. And I'm not arguing that that's ineffective. At times, that's needed. I'm just giving you these tools so you have ways to think about your instruction. Then we move to student-centered instruction. Sometimes this is helpful to get students to do more of the thinking and more of the cognitive work, and we become facilitators, more like guides on the side as we design experiences that will help students learn content in these kinds of ways. And so we talked last night about discussion-based methods, cooperative learning, inquiry-based learning, and problem-based learning. And some of these models obviously are more student-centered in the sense that the students are doing a lot more of the learning, and the responsibility for learning is much more on them than on us, even though we're still guides. There's lots of, affordances to this model too. So I guess in a nutshell, what I'm trying to explain is that both of these models have their strengths and their weaknesses. And I wanted to present all of these models to you as ways to say, as you approach different contexts and different situations, that you have these tools in your belt to decide and make judgments about what you think might be the best approach to teaching students. So that's where we've been so far, and I'm hoping that all those dots are connecting. Now, this upcoming week, we're going to be faced with a new question. Not just, okay, we're planning for students and we're generally looking at the science behind effective planning and instruction, but what happens when we have to go teach students and they're all so different? And we've learned that from our culturally responsive, tactics as we get to know students. And now I have to go teach students and they're just so different and they're so unique. And so you've probably heard about this concept called differentiation instruction, or differentiated instruction. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today in this lecture, but we're actually going to differentiate that term from the concept that I really want to focus on, which is universal design for learning. And so that's really what we're going to talk about in this quick video as you go through this lecture. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull up a PowerPoint here that I've made before. I'm going to go ahead and put it in presenter view. I want to walk you through a little bit about what universal design for learning is. Again, it's not just a lesson plan approach. It's more of a framework. It's a frame of mind. It's a way of thinking about things. So let me give you an analogy that I think will make this a little bit clearer. So I want you to imagine it's a hot summer day and you see the ice cream truck. Now, who wouldn't be excited about the ice cream truck, right? And some of you might if you have, different interests and preferences, and that's all part of this anyways. But anyways, let me get to it. So The ice cream truck pulls up and you're excited. You're going to go up and you're going to get some ice cream to cool off and just have a refreshing sweet treat on a hot day or just on, any day because you're hungry and you're interested in ice cream. So as you approach the ice cream truck, you'll see that you have this kind of menu that I somewhat tried to recreate. It's not the same menu, but zooming in a little bit. And you're looking at the plethora of options that you can have. Some of you might really be interested in, like my kids, the little character ice creams down here. Oh, I want Scooby. I want Pink Panther. Some of you might be like me, chocolate lovers, right? And looking at all these different chocolate options. Some of you might be more fruity, and like just a refreshing popsicle or a slushie or something like that, right? So you're just thinking about all these different things that you can get. So you walk up to the front and to the ice cream truck driver and say, hey, I'd really like, and you list your choice, only to find out that the truck driver is actually, unfortunately, only selling that particular popsicle / ice cream today. So this is where UDL comes in. This is a lot like the classroom. You can start to see that this becomes a barrier, right? You are interested in something else, but the ice cream truck is only offering one thing. And this is a lot of what happens in the classroom, right? So students have different interests. They have different ways in which they are engaged. And we offer a one-size-fits-all curriculum. And so it serves, and this is the big concept for UDL, that we are trying to remove barriers. And one way in which this framework helps us think about removing those barriers is to think about engagement barriers or barriers to engagement. And so much like we're facing in this ice cream truck example, there's a barrier to our interest or a barrier to our engagement. We no longer want to buy ice cream from the ice cream truck driver because he's not offering the ice cream that we are interested in or that we would want to engage with. And so there's the first barrier. Now, the next barrier that UDL wants us to think about is if I'm a parent approaching the truck and I start to realize that that's the only ice cream that he's offering, I'm having some issues with that because I have a 4-year-old and maybe when he goes to eat that, it's going to just be a sloppy mess all over his hands. I don't have a hand sanitizer or a wipe. We're outside and I'm just thinking about all those things. And so those create barriers to what UDL would call representation. Meaning the way the ice cream is being represented to me or to the people that I'm purchasing ice cream for is not conducive to the way they want to consume the ice cream or the way they want to eat the ice cream. And so let's do the parallel to the classroom. Sometimes in the classroom, we deliver instruction based on those two approaches that we talked about in a one-size-fits-all mindset that the curriculum isn't being represented well to our students. So we can even just use an example, an English language learner. If I'm delivering this lecture right now in only English, that would be a barrier of representation or a representation barrier to those students because they can't process the content in English. They might need that content translated into the language that they're more familiar with as they're learning English. So that's something that UDL gets us thinking about. Last but not least, and here's the third kind of tier of UDL, and that's going back to our ice cream truck example. I'm going to now pay for the ice cream. I just decided I'm going to go with the firework. I'm fine with the way it is. Here you go. Here's some money of how much it costs. And the truck driver says to me, oh, I'm sorry, we only take card. And so at this moment, you can start to see all the barriers that are in place and how frustrated I probably would be with this ice cream truck. And I would be totally checked out, which is a lot of what happens to our students. But this third barrier is what they call action and expression and really deals with assessment in the lesson. And so the ways in which we ask students to demonstrate their knowledge or the ways in which we give them activities to learn the things that we're trying to teach them may serve as a barrier to them because that's not the way they like to act or express their learning. They may have cash and we're expecting them to show us in a credit card version. And so I hope that this analogy helps us understand that really UDL is this, right? These are the three principles of UDL, that we need to be focused on engagement, on representation, and on action and expression. And as you can see here, engagement's the why of learning, the what of learning is representation, and the how of learning is action and expression. We're going to go a little bit deeper here in a sec. So let's just test your knowledge based on that analogy. So I want you to go ahead and pause me in a second. And here's my question. I want you to, as you can see over here, how does this dinner party create barriers to engagement, representation, and action and expression? So just pause for a sec and answer that question to yourself. Okay, so hopefully you're back now. And let's just talk about maybe some of the things you might have been thinking about. So in what ways does this serve as a barrier to engagement, right? Well, if this is a party, right, where different food is being served, that might heighten engagement because now I have different options, things I might be interested in. So maybe I'm, a vegan, and so I don't want to have necessarily meatballs in my spaghetti, so I want to go ahead and maybe have the option of eating a salad. But there could also be a barrier because what if I'm like, well, I would like some pasta. So maybe we have to have a spaghetti with meatballs and a spaghetti without meatballs, right? So that we're providing different options for all of the learners or all the people at the table to be able to have access, right? And to be able to increase the engagement. How does this dinner party, and again, there's many examples you could probably think of, I'm just highlighting a couple. How does this dinner party create barriers to representation? Well, it depends, right? So if we look around, we see that at least there is some different ways in which people are consuming their drinks. And so we have, wine glasses or beer glasses or just regular glasses. And so that might not be an issue. But when I do look at the utensils, maybe as I start to think about the fact that they're going to eat some Chinese food, as you can see right here, that a fork and a knife might not be an appropriate way to consume that Chinese food. And so maybe we would need more utensils. These are just, again, very broad and hypothetical examples so you can start to assess yourself and self-assess whether you're understanding UDL. And then last and not least, but action and expression, right? Could be a lot of different things, right? It could be, we could go back and use the silverware example. We can use just the way that they're interacting in the party, right? And so the way that they're having conversations. So maybe they want to have conversations with different people and the tables serving as a barrier to be able to, mingle and intermingle with one another. So there's lots of things you can take from this, but the idea is, again, the barriers that exist, and this is kind of what we call the dinner party example, is similar to school, right? That there are barriers when you show up to a dinner party that isn't UDL designed, which means from the onset, you're thinking about your students, you're culturally responsive, and you're trying to create an environment where everything that you do provides options so that they can feel that they can access any and everything and feel comfortable in this setting without having any barriers. And that's what we're trying to remove, is those barriers. Okay, let's do another quick assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up this YouTube video, hopefully, maybe not. And I'm going to have you watch this video. And this guy is now going to talk a little bit about differentiation. And I want you to see if you can see the difference between when he talks about UDL type of differentiation and when he just maybe talks about differentiation, and see if we can differentiate, I hate to keep using that word, between differentiated instruction and UDL. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. So I hope that you can see what he's talking about right now is UDL. right? And so like you have different people that come with different, again, interests, ways that they want to represent things, way they want to express things. And he is thinking intentionally about those students and trying to provide options. And so if there's more options, then barriers get removed. And he's thinking intentionally about, hey, some people might want just a little bit to drink or a lot to drink. Some people might want to have different types of wings. Knowing my people, especially if I know that they're vegan or meat lovers or not meat lovers, I'm going to provide options all the way across the board. And so that's very much UDL. But now he starts talking about this dip. The dip is a little bit of a weird example, so we're going to just cross that out. I don't think that fits necessarily with the framework that we're talking about, but as he talks about the time, notice the difference. Okay, so this guy's intentionally being facetious. If you've ever seen some of his videos, he's hilarious. He's actually a principal somewhere in the country. I can't remember exactly where, but he does some great videos. But anyways, it's that last part with time, right? And so you'll start to notice the difference. Before, I'm providing options and allowing people or allowing my students to choose flexible ways in which they want to learn, or flexible ways in which they want to, access and be a part of the party. If I didn't provide those options, there might be barriers during that party, and people might not enjoy themselves or get as much out of the party, much like the classroom. They may not learn. But it's this last part that really focuses on differentiation. Now he's saying, instead of allowing students to choose, and I'm providing flexible options that will allow them to navigate the learning space or the party space, now I'm going to control the options. And so I'm going to say, you need to show up at this time, or you need to show up at this time, or you need to show up at this time. That is differentiation. Differentiation is more where you differentiate on the spot, or if the teacher is more in control of what the options are per se. I want to make sure I make that clear, because the teacher is always in control of the options, but it's more, UDL is really we're providing all the options, knowing our students, and the students then get to choose. Where differentiated instruction is where we make the differentiation in the moment. And there's the difference, or the slight difference between those two. And if that still doesn't make sense, I'm realizing that there's a better way to explain it, and I'm just struggling with doing so right now. I'm going to go ahead and get into this, and maybe it'll make more sense. Okay, so this is super small, and I apologize for that. Let me go ahead and make this a little bigger, so I'm not in presenter mode, and you can already see it a little bit better this way. Oh, not from the beginning. I'm so sorry. Let's go back. Play from current slide. There we go. Okay. So the difference with UDL, so let me give you an example let me do UDL and then we'll go to differentiation, is that we have these three pieces that we talked about, but ultimately what we're trying to do is scaffold students to become these kinds of learners. So the purpose of UDL is not just to differentiate. The purpose of UDL is to allow to create empowered students that are purposeful and motivated. They know how to engage in learning, and they know when learning is not engaging, how to make changes to engage themselves. They're also resourceful and knowledgeable. They recognize that if the lesson isn't meeting their needs, they know exactly how to access different things or create certain things for themselves so that the content makes sense. And so, for example, if I'm a autonomous learner because I understood UDL and I recognize that in this particular lesson that I'm delivering in this lecture right now, that this lecture is not helping me, I would be resourceful and knowledgeable and know what to do next in order to make sure I learned this content. Students that don't know how to do that are independent learners, and UDL is trying to create this way of where we're empowering students. Differentiation, and let me go to action expression and we'll talk about differentiation, but action expression, same thing. So if the teacher's saying, I want you to show your learning this way, they're more strategic and goal directed, right? They might say, well, I don't think I can show you that way, but I can show you this way, or maybe I can set this goal, or maybe I can do X, Y, and Z. And these are the kinds of learners that this model will create. Now, how is this different than differentiation? So differentiation is very much on the spot, and again, very teacher controlled, right? So let me talk about on the spot. On the spot means that I'm in class, I'm asking students to, show me their learning through a writing example. And not that the writing is important, right? We're just saying, go ahead and write this, this paper, right? And let's just even talk about right now. Let's talk about virtual settings. I want you to go ahead and use this, tech app to show me your learning. And a student's like, I can't access it. Differentiation might say, okay, everybody else can access it, but you, on the spot, I'm going to actually just go ahead and want you to type it up in an email and send it to me. So I differentiate on the spot, right? Again, not a bad thing. Sometimes teachers have to differentiate in that way so that students access the curriculum and these barriers get removed. But the difference is that the student isn't learning how to be empowered. And UDL provides all of these options so that students can flexibly choose what learning is best for them. And then in the process, they become more empowered learners, which is what the whole design for UDL is. So I hope that makes sense, and we'll keep hitting on this. I don't want you to get too hung up on the difference between differentiation and UDL, but I do want you to understand the difference between them. And essentially, one is really trying to empower learners, but the other one is just a quick removal of barriers. When I say that it's very teacher-directed, I might, for example, decide, okay, well, I'm going to, I recognize that I have some learners that like to work in groups and some don't. So I'm going to make sure that when we, do this lesson, then I'm going to have those who like to work on their own can work on their own, and I'll put them in groups. And then these that don't, I'll just let them work by themselves. A UDL approach might be more like, hey, today we're going to go ahead and be, working on this task. If you feel like you want to work in a group, you may go work over here. If you want to work by yourself, you may work over here. Now you're giving students the options versus forcing students to do it the way that you feel like it needs to be differentiated. So I think I beat a dead horse, but I hope that makes sense. Okay, so let's go into just this first piece, and this is where we're going to end, just so I can give you some examples. Engagement, recruiting interest. So I want you to keep in mind, if a student isn't engaged in class, then there is a barrier that's stopping them from being engaged. I thought about this morning too. I think sometimes we as teachers have the tendency to call students or label students as lazy, especially in this kind of online setting. Oh, these lazy students, they don't want to do anything. I want us to change that vocabulary because here's why. If I say a student's lazy, I'm automatically putting the responsibility on them. And instead, if I use the word unmotivated or unengaged, it puts more responsibility on me. Now, some of you might philosophically disagree with that, and that's okay. You're allowed to have those beliefs. But I want you to be aware that when you change your mindset in that way, yes, students have responsibility. I'm not negating that. But what I'm saying is that most of the time, the students aren't yet metacognitive enough to know why, they're unengaged or even understand all of that process, right? And so it's our job then as teachers to try to figure out our students in culturally responsive ways and try to seek to remove those barriers. And yes, it does put a little bit more work on us, but in the end, that's our job, right? Our job is to engage students. And so if we start to notice that there's an unengagement problem, instead of putting it all on the students and expecting them to change, I would argue as a teacher that you should seek to figure out what the barrier is. Maybe the barrier is your curriculum. Maybe the barrier is the setting. Maybe there's lots of different barriers. And once you can figure that out, you can work to remove that barrier through UDL. So in what ways might students be, or in what ways can we counter unengagement, right? So they give 3 principles. First is optimize individual choice and autonomy. Let's go back to concept-based teaching. You notice I'm going to give you some examples and non-examples and hope that you understand this principle. So first non-example, write a 5-paragraph essay on a specific topic, okay? Versus an example, write an argumentative essay on a self-selected topic, right? So I'm just optimizing individual choice and autonomy. They still have to write a 5-paragraph essay, that's the content. But for UDL, I'm saying, instead of saying write it on this prompt, I'm saying write it on a prompt that you think. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to give them a specific prompt. But we could also provide as much choice and autonomy as possible, right? Okay, optimize relevance, value, and authenticity. Okay, so non-example. Assign students a task that focuses on a specific socially relevant topic, right? So you're like, oh, I'm really, really interested in this topic. So we're gonna go in and we're gonna have students work on this topic. Now again, sometimes the content drives that, but there are a lot of standards that are very open about the content. So I think going back to English, there is an actual standard where they need to write. Doesn't say what they have to write. And maybe as you look at your curriculum, yes, there is a certain, skill or standard, but maybe it doesn't assign the topic per se. And so if I'm going to optimize relevance, I'm going to allow students to choose between a variety of socially relevant topics. That way I'm optimizing the relevance, the value, and the authenticity, and removing a barrier. Students might not want to do the work because they don't feel like what you're asking them to do they have choice over or they're interested in. And so these two principles allow the barrier to be removed. And then minimize threats and distractions, right? And this might be a big piece right now in online spaces. Students are distracted. Students are at home, and it's really a lot easier to be distracted. So examples and non-examples, right? When writing, everyone needs to be quiet, right? Now, that would be an easy way to break that down. But remember, this model is about helping students become empowered learners. So maybe when writing, students have a variety of ways that they can engage in the process. And so you're minimizing, threats. And so if students feel like, well, I'm distracted in this way, then give them options of ways they might not be distracted. If a student's like, I really just don't like to be on online learning, this is dumb, I don't want to do this at home, provide them some options. See if you can figure out ways to minimize those threats and distractions that might help them re-engage. Okay, representation, perception, right? And so in this piece, that showed up that way. You want to now, when you represent the curriculum, offer ways of customizing and displaying the information. So examples and non-examples, right? Display a PowerPoint in class. That would be a non-example, right? Because that's only one way to display the information versus post the PowerPoint on class website with links for students to go deeper. So now you have students that, instead of forcing them to look at the PowerPoint in, one time in class, you're giving them the PowerPoint on a website. They can pull it up, they can review it, they can go back. For students that need it to be translated, they can work on translating it. This way, you're offering ways for that content to be represented in different ways and providing a heightened way for students to get it and removing barriers to students getting it. Okay, principle number 2, offer alternatives for auditory information. So, to MASH, right, class will watch a TED Talk with subtitles. That would be a non-example. Because if you think about an English language learner, if your subtitle, right, let's just say, well, I'll just, use a subtitle in Spanish. You might have a student in class that speaks Punjabi, right? And that's not going to work for that particular student. So class is going to watch the TED Talk with subtitles, printed text copies, and translations. And so this way now you're providing a lot of different options for students who are listening to a talk in class so that they can access and have that material represented to them in a way that meets their needs. Last principle for representation, you want to offer alternatives also for visual information, right? So a non-example, teacher provides students a visual with text to enhance the lecture versus teacher provides students a visual with text that has text-to-speech capabilities or a peer assistant, right? So just think about it. I'm watching this video and I'm deaf, or I'm looking at this video and I'm blind, right? Or there could be a plethora of different ways that visual information I'm giving students, that there's a barrier there. And once you get to know your students in culturally responsive ways, you can know what those are and provide options for them to enhance the classroom. Okay, last one, action and expression. The way in students are assessed or in ways that we expect students to demonstrate or engage in their learning. And I want to use different word than engage, but just think about a learning activity. You want them to work in groups, or you want them to do X, Y, and Z. So vary the methods for response and navigation, right? So don't just say, okay, we're going to do this activity and you're all going to do it this way. Instead, students write an exit. So like, as an example, students write an exit ticket would be a very, linear way of thinking about showing their learning versus students may write an exit ticket or share their responses orally or through Flipgrid or all of these different options. Now, I know that you might be thinking right now, like, wow, if they do all that, that's a lot for me to look at and do. So again, temper this. I'm not suggesting that you have to be full UDL today, but just think about the barriers that exist in your class and try to remove them. Once the barrier is removed, if it's just 2 options and all of a sudden that barrier is removed and now students really feel like they're succeeding, that's it, right? So I would really use these principles in light with my students, right? If I start to see barriers, then my job is to seek to remove them. For example, if I notice that students aren't performing well on the exit ticket, maybe I provide another option and see if that other option will help them demonstrate their learning better. Last one, optimize access tools with assistive technology. So again, example, non-example, students are invited to use their Google Chromebooks to complete a task, which you think would be like, wow, that's a great option. But again, it's only one option. Versus students are invited to use multiple and varied technologies to complete a task. So, in the nutshell, UDL is all about removing barriers. And as you go back and look, the principles there will help you just focus on where barriers might exist to engagement, to representation, and to action and expression. And so, again, if you have any questions about this, I know that was a large overview, and again, doing the best that I can to help you understand just the basic tenets of the model and its affordances. We definitely can pick it up in class and talk about some of the things that may seem confusing. But that's UDL, and that's what we're going to be focusing on, is trying to develop a lesson with those principles in mind, and trying to deliver a lesson with those principles in mind, and learning from that experience on where we need to improve and where we need to continue to learn how to become a more UDL focused teacher. If you look at our California teacher performance expectations, UDL is chalked through the entire standard framework. And when it comes to the TPA, the teacher performance assessment that you'll take, within 5 years of and I need to make that clear last night, so I'll make it clear today. You do have 5 years from when you graduate from our program to clear your credential. You will get a credential. You'll have 5 years to clear it. And part of clearing it, you'll have to do some induction things as well as pass the TPA. So within that TPA framework, to get a high score, you have to demonstrate UDL principles. And so California is very big on this framework of UDL. And I think UDL is complicated, and I'm not saying that there aren't constraints and things that make it challenging, for sure. But I definitely think it's a good step to trying to meet all students' needs in the classroom. And so I look forward to working with you further this upcoming week as we try to go on this journey of incorporating this into our practice. And I'll see you then.